All right. Welcome to one of the New Connecticut Farmer Alliance's winter workshops. My name's MC and I am the coordinator over at the Farmers Alliance. As you may or may not know, the New Connecticut Farmer Alliance is a group of about 400 plus farmers in Connecticut that come together to build a social network as well as connect farmers to service providers such as the Legal Food Hub that can provide them meaningful services and make it just a little bit easier to be a farmer in Connecticut. Apologies, I'm also letting people in from the waiting room as I'm speaking. In a normal year, the New CT Farmer Alliance would have a big event in December called Build Your Network or Our Future, which is a chance for farmers to meet each other and also to meet with service providers and get that sort of like face-to-face interaction and know who you can call with your legal questions. But of course, this year, everything was different. So we had a sort of smaller, pared down online event in December, and we are pairing it with a series of workshops throughout the winter, which has actually given us a really great chance to like dig deeper into some of these topics. So this is the second to last workshop. If you want to check out the recordings of the ones that we've already had, I'll send a link to the chat. There's also one more that's going to be with UConn Extension next Monday. So that'll be great if you want to register for that one as well. I'll be on tech support today. So if you have any problem, you get kicked off the Zoom or anything, feel free to email me at newctfarmers@gmail.com. I'm the one who sent out the Zoom link earlier today. Yeah, and without further ado, also if you could introduce yourself in the chat, maybe just say your name, what farm you work at or run, and where you're located. Then we can get a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. And I'll hand it over to Colin for the presentation.
Great, thank you, MC. And it's great to meet everyone. I'm gonna share my screen while you all are introducing yourselves. All right, can you see that coming through? All right, great, excellent, thanks. Well, welcome everyone. As MC said, my name is Colin Antaya. I'm a legal fellow with Conservation Law Foundation as part of the Legal Food Hub at CLF. And I'm very excited to be here today to talk with everyone about structuring your farm business and some of the primary options you have when doing so. So first, I would like to, before we dive into the various entities we're going to discuss today, I'd like to just briefly introduce the Legal Food Hub in case you don't really know what it is or remind you if you do. The Legal Food Hub I would describe as a matchmaking service for farmers, food entrepreneurs, and related organizations that are looking for some free legal help with business issues they may be facing. Basically, the Legal Food Hub, or the Hub, matches farmers and food entrepreneurs with attorneys in our pro bono attorney network. These are pre-vetted attorneys that we've ensured are qualified and knowledgeable in the services they provide, and they are willing and very happy to provide free legal services to folks. We also provide educational materials on common business legal issues like this webinar, but we have a variety of legal guides and other pre-recorded webinars on our website, legalfoodhub.org. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. How the hub works briefly, you can go onto our website, legalfoodhub.org. You can apply right there to get matched with an attorney. You put in some basic information about yourself and the sort of help you're looking for. My colleague Mary will give you a call to determine your legal needs in particular. And then she'll identify an attorney in our network who's qualified to help you with that issue. She'll introduce you and basically step aside to let you and the attorney work together to solve the issue you may be facing. We also check in periodically just to make sure things are going smoothly and to help with any issues that may arise, but that's the basic framework. We do have a few eligibility requirements. You have to be a farmer, a food entrepreneur, or a farm or food related organization. That third category, new CT farmer might qualify, for example, a nonprofit that's helping farmers. And then we do have a few eligibility guidelines in terms of income. You have to be operating a business, and if so, it must be a new business, which means it opened in the last 3 years, or it's not yet opened, which may be the case for some folks on this call. If it's older than 3 years, you can still qualify if you made at least $5,000 in the prior year. And then the business's net annual income cannot exceed $30,000. And then finally, we have a personal income limit. This is to make sure that our services, our free services, are being targeted towards the people who most need them, where your personal income should not exceed 400% of the federal poverty level. We have all that information on our website, as well as what that 400% actually is in dollars. And I would encourage you to check that out. I would also say if you think I'm right on the line here, or maybe I'm a little bit over the line on one of these, don't let that stop you from reaching out to us if you need some help. We may still be able to help you, or may be able to connect you to an attorney who we can at least vet for you and let you know they're qualified. And then just briefly here, some of the examples of legal issues we've helped people with in the past. Entity formation, which is the topic of today's webinar. We have tons of attorneys that work on that. I'm very happy to help you with that. Employment issues, intellectual property, real estate, contracts, food safety, and tons more. So again, legalfoodhub.org, and we're very happy to help. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, we can talk about entity formation, choosing the best structure for your farm business. In having this conversation today, there are 6 key considerations that we'll use to look at each of these entities we'll discuss. They'll guide our conversation today and will help us to sort of compare and contrast the different entities we're looking at. The first consideration is formation. This is basically the question of how do you form the entity? Is it informal, or does it perhaps require some kind of formal filing with the state, for example, and paperwork? Then there's the question of governance. This is basically the question of who controls the business and how do they exert that control, make those decisions. The question of funding. The different entities we'll discuss today have different opportunities for raising funds for your business, and that will be an important consideration. Then there's risk and liability. This is a really important one. How can or can some of these entities help you to limit your personal liability for the obligations or debts of the business? That's an important consideration. Taxation, that obviously is important as well. These different entities are taxed in different ways, and I'll highlight that as we're going through. And then finally, business goals. I won't call this out in particular for every entity, but it'll be in the background, and we'll talk about it more specifically for some of them. This is basically the question of if you have social or environmental impact goals in addition to making a living, how might some of the business entities we'll discuss today benefit you in that regard? So with those considerations in mind, we can begin. The first 2 structures I want to talk about are what I'll call informal structures. These are sole proprietorship and partnership. These are informal structures because you don't, with one small exception that we'll discuss, you don't really need to file paperwork in order to form these entities. They're kind of default entities. Anyone who is operating a business like a farm, for example, if you're doing it on your own, you're operating a sole proprietorship. If you're doing it with someone else, you're operating a partnership. You don't need to file any paperwork with the state. I'll explain that more in detail in just a moment, but I just wanted to flag these as informal structures. So first we can talk about sole proprietorship. This is basically a business that's owned by one individual. It's kind of the simplest of all the entities we'll discuss today. Formation. This is informal. Like I said, it's formed by default. Any individual, any farmer selling a product or service is operating a sole proprietorship, whether they know it or not. You may need to register with the town or city that you're located in. This changes by town. And it's particularly the case if you're operating under a fictitious name, or what people sometimes call a doing business as name. So what does that mean? Often if you're operating a farm and you go to a farmer's market to sell your produce, you might have a name for your farm, Happy Acres Farm or something like that. And you're selling, that's the sign, you're selling through that business. That's a fictitious name. So that can be something that you may need to file with the town or city you're located in. Your town's website should have information on this, or you can contact someone at the town government to ask about that. And that should be a pretty simple filing that you can probably handle on your own. It's pretty straightforward, although we'd be happy at the Legal Food Hub to connect you with an attorney if you wanted to, but generally not necessary. In terms of governance, the sole proprietorship is as simple as it comes. The person operating the business, you, the farmer, you are in sole control of the business. You're making all the decisions, which is nice. In terms of funding, sole proprietorship funding opportunities are pretty limited. Basically, you can take out a loan, you can take on some debt as the business owner. But in terms of raising capital in some of the ways that we'll see with some of the other entities, like through attracting investors, for example, this is not really particularly something that the sole proprietorship is well suited to. You could attract another owner to the business and split ownership of the business with them. But at that point, you'd be forming a partnership, which we'll discuss that in a minute. So basically, your options in a sole proprietorship, your main option would be to take out a loan or to borrow money from friends or family. That has its own risks as well. In terms of personal liability and risk for the sole proprietorship, there is what attorneys will call unlimited personal liability. This is not a good thing. It basically means the sole proprietorship has no legal shield or protections between you and the business. So what does that mean? If in operating your farm as a sole proprietor, you take out a loan to perhaps buy some farm equipment, even if you do that, in the name of the business, the loan, rather than on your personal capacity, if the farm doesn't do well, if you're not able to pay back the loan for some reason, the lender can go after you personally and after your personal assets to get their money back. There's no difference between you and the business in that regard. Now, you can take out insurance as a sole proprietor to cover some types of liability and risk, and that's probably a good idea. But compared to some of the other entities we'll talk about today that do offer a liability shield, as it's called, there is no liability shield in the sole proprietorship. And then the last consideration here is taxation. So this phrase, pass-through tax treatment, I'll use quite a bit today. Basically, what it means is it's quite simple. It means that the income of the business is not taxed at the business level. Instead, that income goes to you, the sole proprietor, and you pay taxes on that income when you file your personal income taxes, and you have deductions and credits and all the things that you're familiar with. But it's not taxed at the business level. It's taxed at the individual level. This idea will make the most sense in contrast to corporations when we talk about that, where income is taxed at both the business and the individual level.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you talk about liability, there's both debt liability and then I don't know what the right terminology is, civil liability, like someone suing you because they ate something or whatever. What is the right terminology to differentiate between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, civil liability is a phrase that's used. Personal liability also is often used in that capacity. Yeah, I mean, you're basically talking about liability for somebody suing you if they come to your farm and they trip and fall, right? And they might sue you. Yeah, that's personal liability, and you can get personal liability insurance that can, a lot of people have that on their car insurance, for example. Yeah, that can help to cover in that situation. Yeah, great question. All right, so in terms of the partnership, which is the next informal structure we'll talk about today, this is very similar to the sole proprietorship. It's a business owned by two or more individuals. It is, again, informal, so it's formed by default. If you and your husband, you and your wife, you and your spouse are operating a farm together, you're operating in a partnership, as long as you've agreed to split ownership of the business. The same sort of general considerations about filing with the town, especially if you're using a fictitious name, applies. So you're going to want to check on your town's rules about that. But otherwise, there are no formal requirements for filing for a partnership. One I'll mention, though, although it's not required, having some sort of written agreement among the partners is highly recommended. This can be a pretty straightforward document, but it'll lay out ownership percentage. It'll lay out perhaps different responsibilities. Maybe you want to split decisions about finances versus on-farm sort of business decisions, and you can sort of memorialize all of that in a written partnership agreement. it's something that attorneys can help you with. And at the hub, we'd be very happy to help you find an attorney to assist you if you wanted to, although it's not, technically required. But just, want to flag that having these things in writing is always a good idea. Governance in a partnership, it's shared control. It's often 50-50 between the two partners. It doesn't have to be that way, but it is shared control in terms of who's making the decisions and owning the business. Funding, this is basically the same as the sole proprietorship. You can take out loans for the business. You can attract additional investors, perhaps, but you're going to have to give them, generally they're going to demand an ownership percentage in the partnership, at which point you're expanding the number of partners. You'd have to rewrite the partnership agreement, to account for the new person or persons in there. It can be complicated. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that. And then in terms of risk and liability, this is basically the same as sole proprietorship. There is no liability shield in a general partnership. There's unlimited personal liability. And the added twist here is that even though in a partnership, generally you'll split the benefits, the profits 50-50, the liability doesn't get split. The liability, as far as the law is concerned, each partner is fully liable for all of the risk. The legal phrase you may have heard, jointly and severably liable. That means that the lender in an example where you can't pay back a loan could choose to go after either partner. Even if partner A takes out the loan for the business, the lender could go after partner B because both of you as partners in the business are fully liable. So just keep that in mind. Taxation, this is again very similar to the sole proprietorship. Pass-through tax treatment. So the income of the business is not taxed at the business level, it's taxed at the individual level. And of course, most likely the partners are going to split the income in some way. So it's 50-50. You'd only pay tax on the 50% that you individually are earning. Obviously if you're married and you're filing together your taxes, then that's a different situation. But the idea here is basically taxes are proportional to the amount of income that you're getting. All right, so let's review here some of the pros and cons of the partnership and sole proprietorship models. The pros, super easy to form. You basically form them whether you want to or not, right? And then the founder or founders have a high level of control over the business, which can be a big benefit. In terms of disadvantages, the fact that there's no liability shield, it's a real disadvantage and something to keep in mind as you're operating a business as a sole proprietorship or partnership. You can limit that a little bit through insurance, but it's not as good as some of these other entities we'll talk about. And then the limited funding opportunities can be a bit of a drawback. This is something that you obviously will weigh these pros and cons for yourself. And if you need help talking it through with an attorney as well, the hub would be very happy to help you do that. All right. So those are the informal structures we will have discussed today. The rest of the presentation will be focused on what I'm calling formal structures, which basically just means structures that have some kind of formal filing requirement. We'll talk about limited liability companies, LLCs, for-profit corporations, or what people just often call corporations, public benefit corporations, which is a new and kind of exciting type of corporation we'll discuss briefly, nonprofit corporations, and then cooperatives, and that'll be it. All right, so limited liability companies, LLCs, as you may have heard them called. This is a for-profit business that combines aspects of a corporation and a partnership. That might not mean very much at the moment, but I'll try to explain what I mean. So as a formal entity, the LLC does require filing with the state. What it's generally referred to as filing articles of organization. This is paperwork that'll have a variety of information that you'll be required to notify the state about. Name of your business, a registered agent to receive communications from the state, address, that sort of thing. You can find more information on that online or through the hub. Now, the governance structure of the LLC is governed by the operating agreement, which we'll talk about in a second, and state law. As a formal entity, there are state laws that govern how LLCs operate in various states. The operating agreement is it's kind of like a constitution for your LLC. It's something that you will draw up with the other members of the LLC, or if you're the sole owner, you can write it yourself. It's not something that you need to file with the state, like the Articles of Organization, but these are basically sort of rules for how the organization will operate. Who will make decisions? Who will make what types of decisions? How will the income from the business be split and distributed? How will records be kept for the business? That sort of thing will be laid out in the operating agreement. The benefit, though, for the LLC is, even though it's formal, it's kind of a smaller and more contained type of entity. So there's no board of directors, for example, which you'll see in a lot of these other entities we'll discuss. The members of the LLC get to make the decisions about the company according to the operating agreement. And if you're the sole owner, you're obviously making all the decisions about the LLC. So it can be quite flexible in terms of the day-to-day management.
Hey, Colin, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes, please.
Someone just asked in the chat, why have an operating agreement if you are a single member LLC?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say it's always good to get things in writing when you can for your own benefit. It's actually not something that I would say. I don't know. I'm not an expert on LLCs, so I can't say that you don't need to have one if you're a sole owner. That's something that if you are wanting some more guidance on, we'd be very happy to help you with at the hub. My assumption would be that there would still be some requirements for having an operating agreement, but it would look different than if you were laying it out for different members. But that's a great question. Thank you. So in terms of funding, again, you can always borrow in the name of the LLC, and there are some liability benefits that we'll discuss in a moment. You can also attract new investors to the LLC by having them come on as new members to the LLC. So often people are going to want a ownership percentage in the business. They're going to want to be a member in the LLC, but they could come with some real funds to help you with the business. So that's something to keep in mind for the LLC. The real benefit, where it kind of really shines, the LLC is, in the name, it's a limited liability company. So what this means is that the LLC shields you personally from the debt and many of the other obligations of the company. So to use the example we used before, if you take out a loan to buy some farm equipment and the farm itself is not doing well and you can't pay back the loan, as long as you've been careful, by which I mean you've kind of kept your personal financial business separate from the business's financial business, which is always a good idea to do. You sign the loan through the business rather than just to you in your personal capacity, then you'll be shielded from that liability. The lender can go after the business to some of the business assets, for example, to recoup the loan, but your personal assets will generally be protected by that liability shield. That doesn't mean you shouldn't consider insurance. The liability shield, there can be technical situations and strange things can happen. And courts can make different decisions in different cases, but generally you will be shielded from liability by the company, but having insurance is still a good practice. And the last consideration here for the LLC, taxation. This, like the others we've discussed so far, pass through tax treatment. Only the individual is taxed. So in reviewing the pros and cons of the LLC, the benefits, flexible control. It's very similar to the informal entities we discussed earlier. There is here a real advantage, protects your personal assets and limits personal liability. And then the pass-through taxation is a benefit. Income is only being taxed once, and it's only being taxed at the individual level. Some of the disadvantages, there are some formal steps as we discussed for filing, the articles of organization with the state. There are filing fees generally set by the state as well. And there are fewer funding forms relative to the for-profit corporation form, which we'll discuss in a second. All right, moving right along. Thanks everyone for your attention as we run through these entity structures. So for-profit corporations are just corporations. This is a business structure in which shareholders, or stock owners as they're often called, own the business, and the operation is overseen by a board of directors. For-profit corporations are formed by filing with the state. You have to file articles of incorporation. This is pretty similar to the articles of organization that you file with an LLC, and will have similar sort of requirements for filing. What I'll mention though is that there are recurring filings that you have to make often. It can be a bit burdensome to make these filings, and you want to make sure that they are done a corporation. But just so we understand all the requirements here, you also have to issue stock as a corporation. This is actually one of the benefits of a corporation, which we'll discuss in a moment. And then there are a whole slew of state laws governing corporations that you're going to want to make sure you're in compliance with. In terms of governing the corporation, it's governed by its corporate bylaws and by state law. The bylaws are similar to the articles or the operating agreement rather for the LLC. They're basically the constitution for the corporation, and they'll have similar sort of issues laid out in terms of decision making. How many people will be on your board of directors? How will they be chosen? How will you have shareholder meetings? How will records be kept? That sort of thing. Kind of dry, but it is important to do, and you're required to have bylaws as a corporation. The corporation is governed by the board of directors. This is a separate board that makes the governing decisions, and it's important for the corporation to maintain separate financial records. This is actually a legal requirement. So there should be separate corporate accounts, separate corporate records, separate from the sort of personal accounts and records of the directors and the shareholders. Funding, this is where the for-profit corporation shines. So this is the best entity for funding, for fundraising. Basically what you get to do as a corporation is issue stock, and investors, people who are interested in your corporation, purchase that stock, and in purchasing they get a portion of the ownership of the corporation that's proportional to how much stock they've purchased. In return, you get to use that money that they've invested in the corporation to grow the business. You can also always borrow in the name of the corporation, but this option to offer stock is really a great one. The for-profit corporation also has limited liability. The shareholders, the people who own the company, are shielded personally from the debt and other obligations of the corporation. This is similar to the LLC. Taxation for corporations can be more complicated, and there are different types of corporations. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but what I'll mention is that there are what are called C Corps and S Corps. These names C and S just refer to sections in the tax code, section C and section S. C Corp is what people think of as the normal typical corporation. In this case, the corporation has double taxation. You may have heard that phrase. Basically what that means is that the profits of the business are taxed at the corporate level. So the corporation itself pays income tax on those profits. And then when those profits are distributed to the shareholders, in proportion to the amount of the business that they own, those shareholders will have to pay taxes on their personal, on their personal income returns. So, if you are operating a corporation, you have a majority ownership of the shares in the farm or business, the corporation is going to pay tax. That gets taken off the top, and then what's left over, a portion of that will get distributed to you as a shareholder. And then when you file your personal income taxes, you'll pay some additional tax on that. That's why it's called double taxation. The S Corp is a different type of corporation. It has its own requirements. Basically, it can only issue one type of stock, and all of the shareholders have to be US citizens. This actually, S Corp is something that probably a lot of farms that were interested in the corporate form probably would qualify for. And this actually does have the benefit of pass-through taxation, that idea where the income is only taxed once at the personal level. So comparing the S Corp and the C Corp here, you can see why pass-through taxation is generally a benefit. The money is only taxed once in that situation. And I'll say again, the corporation is a complex form. I would encourage you to consult with an attorney if you're interested in this idea, because it's really a good idea to have some help, some legal help in doing that. All right. So reviewing the pros and cons of the for-profit corporation, the advantages. This is the best opportunity to raise capital. Issuing stock is, compared to taking on new members in an LLC or new partners in a partnership, this is really flexible and a much more efficient way to raise capital. The corporation, like the LLC, has limited liability, has that liability shield, which can be very important. And then the S Corp has this pass-through taxation subject to those federal requirements I mentioned about citizenship of shareholders and that sort of thing. The cons, it can be complicated being a corporation. It'd be complicated filing the initial articles of incorporation and maintaining all the filings that you need to do in order to stay in compliance with the law. And there can be fees. There are fees, and those fees can be a problem. And then there's the separate issue of corporate law and state laws governing corporations, which adds another layer of complexity on top of that. And then taxation. The C Corp has double taxation. I'll say, the corporate form is complicated. It usually makes sense for larger businesses. It doesn't mean it can't make sense for a smaller business, but I'll just point that out as something that you could think about as you're sort of mulling over these ideas. I do want to make a side note here about benefit corporations. This is a new type of corporation. There's been a lot of buzz about this recently. The easiest way to explain this is to contrast it with the C Corp or the regular corporation. So in a normal corporation, the managers of the corporation, the board of directors, are legally required to act in what's called the best interests of the corporation. Basically, what that means is that they are required by law to maximize the profits that then go to the shareholders of the corporation. And technically speaking, if you're not doing that as a director, a shareholder could sue the corporation and say you're not maximizing the profits. This could be an issue if you are operating a business, perhaps a farm, and you want to also provide some sort of social mission. Maybe you want to provide an educational mission for new farmers, for example, training, right? A shareholder might argue that that's not going to increase the profits of the corporation, and therefore you shouldn't be doing that. A benefit corporation allows you to be a corporation and also pursue a social mission or an environmental mission, for example. So many states, including now all the states in New England, have passed benefit corporation laws. This is just something to flag. And like the corporation itself, it's complex. There are filing fees and a lot goes into complying with the law here. But it's an interesting new form. And it's exciting. I just wanted to flag that for everyone to take a look at. Okay, so we have two more that we're doing here: nonprofit corporations and cooperatives. Nonprofits are organizations structured for pursuing a social mission instead of pursuing a profit. Like the for-profit corporation, a nonprofit corporation is created by filing with the state, filing articles of incorporation. Now, nonprofit corporations, one of the main reasons or incentives for doing this is to get the tax benefits, and you can get both state and federal tax benefits. If you want federal tax benefits, if you want to be what's often you may have heard referred to as a 501c3 nonprofit, then you need to file for federal tax exemption. So there's an additional federal filing on top of the state filing. The nonprofit corporation is governed in a way that's quite similar to the for-profit corporation. You need to have compliance with state and federal law. You need to have a board of directors. So if you had a nonprofit farm, you need to have a board that was making the decisions about how the farm was operating. There's this additional requirement that as a nonprofit, your activities should be restricted to the nonprofit's mission, as that mission is recorded with the state and the federal government as well. What that means is that when you file for nonprofit status, you express some sort of social mission that the nonprofit is attempting to advance or achieve. And you should be continuing to advance that in all of the activities in the nonprofit. So if you are a farm that is operating as a nonprofit to provide educational training for new farmers, and you want to take on an additional social mission, for example, perhaps you want to start growing produce to donate to local food pantries, for example. That's probably going to be fine. I mean, that's a great social mission to be pursuing. There's a difference there between what you originally were going to achieve. Realistically speaking, it probably wouldn't be an issue. This is the sort of thing where you may want to, at that point, consult with an attorney, to make sure that you're still in compliance with that requirement, that your activities are advancing the original missions that you as a nonprofit was formed to advance. Funding for nonprofits. This is different than the for-profit entities we've discussed. Nonprofits are eligible for a range of public and private grants. Often these grants may be only available for registered nonprofit corporations. And then there is the tax deductible donation avenue. I'm sure a lot of us have seen, particularly at the end of the year, each year we get all kinds of emails and letters in the mail saying, now's the time to donate to, local organization. And if you do so, your donation is tax deductible. What that means is that you as the individual making that donation, you don't need to pay taxes on that, generally. And this can be a great way as a nonprofit to incentivize people to donate to you. Fortunately, the nonprofit corporation does have limited liability, like the other formal structures we've discussed. The directors are shielded personally from the debt and other liabilities that the nonprofit may take on in operating. And then taxation, this is where the nonprofit shines, right? This is sort of the business reason, at least, for forming the nonprofit. You can be entitled to tax exemption on both the state and federal level. This can include all sorts of taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, the corporate income tax. So this is a real benefit of operating as a registered nonprofit. There can be some significant savings in that. So the pros and cons of the nonprofit corporation, the big one, tax exemption. Also the availability to achieve or to secure rather some grants that are available to nonprofits. And then the nonprofit has limited liability as well. The cons, your activities are, confined to the mission that you should be achieving. It's something that I didn't mention earlier, but you as a nonprofit, or rather the nonprofit itself is required to make yearly filings about its finances. And these filings are required to be public by law. This is sort of the trade-off. You get the benefit of the tax exemption, but you have to make some of this information public about your finances. And then, I don't know if it's a disadvantage, but it's a complicating factor, something to keep in mind. Complying with nonprofit laws, like complying with, laws for for-profit corporations can be complicated at times, and something to keep in mind. All right, so the last entity we're going to discuss today is a cooperative. And this is kind of an exciting entity to discuss because of the democratic control structure. Basically, a cooperative is a member-owned business that's designed to provide a service or benefit to the members. So an example of a cooperative in the farm space would be a group of farmers who form a co-op to distribute their produce to local restaurants. The co-op itself, that legal entity, might be taking in the produce from different farms and then distributing that produce to restaurants or schools and institutions, that sort of thing. Another example could be farmers forming a co-op to pool their resources to purchase expensive farm equipment, for example, and then having some kind of way to divide up the use of that equipment. So this form can be useful in the farm and food context. In a cooperative, ownership percentage of the cooperative is generally based on the contribution that each member makes. This could be equity contribution, just the amount of money and investment you're bringing up front, or it could be measured in different ways. It could be measured in the amount of labor contributed or the amount of produce, vegetables contributed, for example, that sort of thing. And then the profits of the business are distributed generally based on that rate of participation that the member is involved in. The cooperative is a formal structure, so you are required to make filings with the state. There are articles of incorporation that you need to file with the state, similar to the other articles of incorporation we discussed. And I'll flag here that pre-planning is really important if you're thinking about doing a cooperative. A cooperative sounds great, and it can be a really helpful tool. But you're going to want to get together with those that you are interested, perhaps in forming a cooperative with, and make sure that it makes sense for everyone. In the example that we had about each of those farmers is going to want to think about whether this will work for them. They might want to write up a business plan first to really nail down the questions of, how are we going to operate this? How are we going to make sure that it's fair for everyone? And this can be something that having legal advice doing could be very helpful for you. In terms of governance, the cooperative, is governed by an operating agreement and again by state law. The cooperative has bylaws like many of these other formal structures that we've discussed that govern many of the sort of structural and operating parts of the cooperative, member meetings, records, that sort of thing. There also will be a board of directors in the cooperative. So although there will be perhaps many members in the cooperative, the governance decisions are often made by a board of directors, and they can be elected and that sort of thing, and that can be laid out in the bylaws. One interesting quirk of the cooperative is that ownership does not equal power, generally speaking. What does that mean? That's pretty abstract. Well, if you think about a corporation, for example, or even an LLC, right, where people might have different ownership percentages, and that translates into different amounts of power in making the decisions in the business. So in a corporation, this is kind of the simplest example because you own a certain percentage of the shares. If you own 51% of the shares, for example, you have 51% of the votes when it comes to making decisions. You can literally buy votes in a corporation. And so you can control the decisions in the corporation. In a cooperative, that's not the case. Generally, the members, even if they're contributing different amounts to the cooperative, generally have equal voting rights. That's often something that's attractive to people participating in the cooperative because it feels and it is more democratic and more fair. But it's a quirk, and where it can be a little bit tricky is when it comes to funding. So in funding a cooperative, you can have the members bring their own capital when they join the cooperative. That can be great. But this one member, one vote that I was just discussing can discourage investment, because often people, when they want to invest, particularly larger investors, they want to get some ownership in the corporation, or in the business rather, in return. And the fact that no matter how much they invest, they still get one vote, that could be discouraging for some larger investors when compared to other things like an LLC, where they might be able to purchase a large ownership percentage in the LLC, for example. Risk and liability in a cooperative. Again, there's limited liability here. We are not in the sole proprietorship or partnership world. We're firmly in the formal structure world, and here you're going to get that liability shield. The members are protected from the obligations and debts of the cooperative. If they were required to contribute something financially to bring some money to the farm and investing in joining, that contribution they made could be at risk, but that's the limit of their personal liability. And then taxation for a cooperative can be a little bit complicated. Basically, the co-op, as the business, distributes the income that it makes to the members as through what's called a patronage distribution. As I mentioned, this often will be proportional to what the members contributed to the business. So, if you were part of this cooperative, or where folks were collecting their vegetables to sell to local businesses, if you contributed 30% of the vegetables that year, or that whatever that time period is, then you would receive 30% of that income as your patronage distribution. That money gets taxed at the personal level, so it passes through to you, gets taxed at the personal level. The co-op itself, if it makes income in dealings with non-members, which can happen, then there can be taxation at the co-op level as well. But generally there's pass-through taxation there. All right, so the pros and cons of co-ops. The advantages, you have the liability shield, you're protecting personal assets from the debts and liabilities of the cooperative. The democratic management style of the cooperative, one person, one vote, can feel very fair and can be very fair. And that can be quite attractive for folks. And then there's this idea of achieving a social benefit, helping out other farmers, for example, all pooling your resources to achieve a common end. In terms of the disadvantages, that same decentralized management style where you have a lot of participating farms and that sort of thing, that can be cumbersome. And then the fact that you have this one member, one vote, as I mentioned, can maybe not be as attractive to outside investment as some of the other corporate forms. And then, as a formal institution that requires filing with the state, there can be some complexities to filing and creating the cooperative. And there's the added complexity of sort of sorting out with different members how the cooperative is going to work.
Colin, I have a question about cooperatives.
Yes, please.
Do you know if there's a minimum number of people required to form a cooperative?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. We have some more resources on the Hub website about cooperatives, which may have that. There's been a whole webinar that was recorded on cooperatives. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in that, you can go to legalfoodhub.org. We have a resource library, and if you just search cooperative in the search bar, it should come right up. If that doesn't answer your question, we'd be happy to connect you with an attorney to talk about that some more. Cool. Yeah, great question. And great cat, by the way.
Thank you.
All right, so that is it in terms of the entities that I wanted to discuss today. It was kind of a whirlwind, and I hope that it was helpful. I'm happy to answer questions. I just want to flag before we go into a Q&A that we have tons more resources related to this and other issues on our resource library at legalfoodhub.org. So I just pulled out some examples here of some of the resources. We have how to choose a business structure, a decision tree. There's a step-by-step guide to forming an LLC. We have a whole guide devoted to operating a sole proprietorship and common issues you might face. We have Co-op Law 101, so that might answer MC's very good question. And then we have tons more of other resources, on this issue of entity formation, and then a variety of other legal issues that you might face in opening or operating your farm. And that's all I have for you in terms of a formal presentation today. But like I said, I'm very happy to answer questions if I can. And if I can't, I'll direct you to our hub, and hopefully they can help you out there. So thank you all very much for your time. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you, Colin. I have a question.
Please.
My name's Mia.
Hey, Mia.
So my question's really more tax related. So I don't know if you could direct me to resources. I don't know if they would be on your website. So I had another business previously. I formed an LLC with S Corp tax treatment.
Okay.
And the benefit for that was primarily it was a single member LLC, and I was trying to set up a solo 401k. And my understanding is that I would be taxed lowest, and that would give me the opportunity to do that. In this instance, it's different business. It's a farm. I just set up an LLC, and I was trying to do the same thing, S Corp. In this case, it's two people. It's not a single member LLC. And I'm not sure, I know I met the requirements reading the IRS guidelines, but I'm not sure if it's the best thing from a tax perspective. Do you have, referrals for people who are specialized in this area?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have attorneys that do tax law. So I feel pretty confident that we would be able to connect you with someone, or at the very least refer you to someone who would be able to help you there. Okay. Because you've gone well beyond my depth of experience.
Oh, okay.
But it's a great question, and we'd be very happy to help you out with that. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. Please.
And then one other follow-up question, if I might.
Sure.
The property that we have has a limited amount of acreage. We have access to, my husband and I have access to acreage that's across the street that's has different owners. It's actually my husband and his brothers. And I'm assuming we could potentially lease that land, but I think it may be designated as forestry and not agriculture. Do you know if that would have to be switched, or is that is a lease agreement just a private agreement? It doesn't have to be filed with the state.
Well, I mean, I know that there are in Connecticut and in many other states, there's land that's conserved for agricultural use, you know, or forestry use and that sort of thing, which sounds like in the situation, it could be a complicating factor. So yeah, I can't answer the question right now based on that information.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
It's just these are types of questions maybe that the Legal Food Hub folks could. Okay.
Absolutely, because we can connect you with an attorney who specializes in land use law, in conservation easements, that sort of thing, who can sit down with you or virtually, I guess, at this point, and discuss the issue, and we would be very happy to help you out. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you. Of course.
Hi.
Hey.
So we were wondering when would be like the right time to look into starting an LLC. We have been looking for land for quite some time, and hopefully within the next few months we'll have some. And we think we want to do an LLC, but is that something that should happen before even getting land? Or is it more something that people, once they have their land, then when they're structuring the business, go ahead and do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you know, as we discussed earlier, there can be advantages to being in a more formal structure. You know, lenders might be more willing to lend to a more formal structure, but that's by no means a guarantee. They'll consider other things as well. So that would be a main consideration that would pop into my mind. But I think that people do different things at different times. I would imagine it's a good idea to get out ahead of things. You know, if you have something in mind to begin planning for it at the very least, you can always have a conversation with someone at the hub about what you're thinking about doing. You don't have to make any commitment to doing anything, obviously. You know, so I would encourage you to reach out to the hub if you're interested in getting that help now or having that conversation with an attorney now, and they can have that conversation with you, and you know, you can agree to circle back with them later, or you might decide after having that conversation with them that let's go ahead and form the LLC now. You know, that's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Brittany, I could say that I am in my 5th year with the farm, and I started as a sole proprietorship because all of this was way too overwhelming to like delve into on top of everything else. And I just filed for an LLC like last month. So I have that from the state now. And it's not really that big of a deal to switch from one to the other.
Okay.
Other than I think I might have to start a new bank account because the sole proprietor bank account is like a doing business as. I don't know. There's like definitely some things that would be more streamlined if you just chose one and stuck with it forever, but it's not like a huge big deal to switch. So for what it's worth.
Yeah, thank you.
I have another question.
Please.
For the LLC, in thinking about insurance, why could you talk about whether or not or why just having an umbrella wouldn't be sufficient? Like, because up until now, we've just had an umbrella. But then talking to someone who specializes in farm insurance, it's like, you know, it's like every little piece. But if it's an LLC and you already have that kind of liability shield, I just don't know about that.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, when you throw farm insurance into the mix, things are even more complicated, right? But I guess what I'll say is about the liability shield for the LLC is, as I mentioned, you know, it's not 100% protection from any sort of liability you might face. So I can give you an example. Let's say someone, as I said before, comes to your farm. They're coming to buy from you, pick up your CSA shares, for example, and they trip and hurt themselves, or an animal kicks them or something. I don't know, something like that, right? And they're injured and things break down and they want to bring a lawsuit. So they might sue both the LLC, the business, and they might sue you personally because they're going to have some kind of argument or some kind of claim about how you personally were negligent on the farm. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to win that case, obviously, but there's a risk that they could succeed in that lawsuit against you personally. In terms of personal actions. If you've been negligent or if you have injured someone, then that might not be a matter of, was the LLC liable? That might be a matter of, were you personally liable? So having something like personal liability insurance or a larger insurance protection could be a good idea. Is that kind of what you were talking about? Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. But then we've had an umbrella. Like, frankly, it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's just an umbrella.
Yeah.
Whereas the farm insurance, like, there's so many itemized bits, like I sort of lose track of what they're even trying to accomplish for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'm wondering, like, is that really, I mean, this is more of an opinion question for you,
mm-hmm.
but is that really, or like, why is that necessary, I suppose, to have that sort of itemized insurance, so to speak, versus an umbrella?
Well, I'm not an insurance expert, so I unfortunately can't think of all the situations in which that might be necessary. We have attorneys that do specialize in insurance law, and I imagine would have a lot to say about that topic and would be able to answer all your questions. So I'm sorry to sound a bit like a broken record here and refer you to the hub, but the hub's really great. We have a lot of really qualified attorneys, and I don't want to give any advice that I don't have the expertise in order to give. But these are great questions. Thank you.
Diane, when you were saying umbrella, do you mean like homeowners umbrella insurance, or are you talking about farm insurance that's an umbrella?
Yeah, right. Hey, Brian, our umbrella, I mean, it was through our,
yes,
our umbrellas through our homeowners, but they understand that we have a farm.
Yeah, I guess that's the part that's new for me, is that, like, is the house considered part of your, personal assets, or is that now considered part of the business assets and subject to liability? I guess that's why there's this farm insurance in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't insure us as a regular house because when we had goats, and so they said we had to be insured as a farm, and so we went with the farm insurance. We're insured as a business, but our house is included in that somehow.
Yeah, and that's before we actually had the farm as a business.
Yeah.
Like, we had goats and we grew random stuff, but then I, began farming as my job.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah. They were worried that our goats were gonna get out and trash somebody's car. So
right.
Yeah,
we don't even have neighbors.
Right. So.
All right. Well, to be continued. I didn't mean to do.
Oh no! We could have a whole conversation about this.
Yeah. Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have another question about cooperatives.
Great.
I'm wondering, because there's so many sort of like added requirements to be legally registered as a cooperative, is there flexibility within the form of the LLC or potentially the nonprofit to set up your bylaws such that you operate like everyone has an equal vote, or are LLCs and or nonprofits like regulated in a way that prevents you from operating them sort of like day to day in a similar democratic style to the nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, in terms of the LLC, the members can determine how they're going to divide up that operating, or rather the ownership share of the business. If you have, 2 people, you can split it 50-50. If you had 4 or 8, you can begin to split things in terms of making them more equal. Definitely. It gets more complicated, I guess, as you add more people, because everyone's going to have to agree on these sorts of things, but that definitely can be done. In terms of the nonprofit, that I don't know. I'm not seeing an obvious way to make that sort of the same sort of democratic member participation as the cooperative. I'm not saying it can't be done. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
No, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question.
Great.
Colin, do you know, does the Legal Food Hub ever work with farmers markets? Is that like something that would kind of qualify as a entity that you'd work with?
Yeah, I think so. I would think so. Absolutely. I think that probably would fall into that, third category of farm or food related organizations. Particularly, if the market is operating as a nonprofit. I don't know if it would necessarily need to be operating as a nonprofit, but I imagine that would be something that we would be interested in and able to help with. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to stick around if folks have other questions. I have my email up here on the screen, cantaya@clf.org. So please feel free to email me if questions come up. I may just refer you to the hub, but maybe I'll be able to answer your question. If you wanted to just skip the middleman and go directly to the Legal Food Hub, our website is legalfoodhub.org. And you'll see a big button on the screen. I think it says apply here or apply now. And you can read more about our eligibility guidelines, and you can apply for assistance, or just to sort of start the conversation to get all your questions answered. We're really excited to be in Connecticut here. We've been operating in Connecticut for a few years now, and we've helped a bunch of farmers, and we love hearing from farmers in Connecticut. So don't hold back. Please reach out.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. All set, MC?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You had